right, so 4 months after I start this podcast and tell you we are going to hang out every single week, I leave you for a good 3 weeks. It has been a while, but it's good to be back in Pat's Interference, and I promise I come bearing good excuses. 1, going to Europe, 2, getting engaged, 3, moving into a new place, 4, going to a wedding, and then 5, hearing every single person in my life offer me advice about the wedding, which, look, I'll be honest, I am very open to. I am happy about, because as far as planning a wedding goes, I am at square -10. And this advice has brought me at least to square -2. But in the process of just being inundated with advice, I want to bring one for the young fellows who listen to this pod, of which I know there are at least a few, because my engagement happened in Spain. I tweeted about it a few days after she said yes. Went extraordinary. I'm going to drop this, and I promise we're going to get to Patriots content in 30 seconds. Fellas, if you are thinking about dropping to one knee, hire yourself a local photographer in whatever place you're going to do it, and have it be a complete surprise. This was something I did overseas. This made our engagement, I don't know how many times better, which was obviously wonderful, best moment of my life. But we had someone take photos from afar. They are professional. There are over 100 of them, because we did an hour-long photo shoot after. These are now your de facto engagement photos. This is someone who knows the area, the timing, to help you schedule. They're out there. I promise, wherever you live, wherever you want to travel, wherever you want to do it, hire a photographer to help you with your engagement. And it will be something your kids, your grandparents, your parents, everyone will thank you for 10 times over. All right, off the wedding soapbox, onto the Patriots. Today, Patriots training camp preview. What this means is we're not really looking ahead to training camp yet. We're looking ahead to the content that's going to be looking ahead to training camp, which is going to come up in the next 2 weeks. Folks like myself, Evan Lazar of CLNS, Alex Barth, and 98.5 The Sports Hub, both of whom are on this episode. There are going to be so many different topics and storylines and positions and players that people want to tell you about and preview what's going to happen. We laid out 10, and I told each of them before the podcast started, of these 10, I want your top 5. We'll dive into those. Everything else we'll skip over. Of course, naturally, there was a lot of overlap, some that only Alex liked, others that only Evan did. So we covered this all. And this is a way to just hone your focus, okay? I know you're going to be reading everything and listening to as much as you can of Patriots content going forward, but we all understand that the long snapper battle matters a little less than how well Mac Jones is throwing the ball deep. How much less? Well, we'll get into that. So no mailbag this week. Again, kind of dipping our toes back into the water as I come back to reality. And Evan and Alex were great. So find them on Twitter, follow them on Patriots Beat, Patriots Press Pass. They do a lot of work on YouTube. Of course, I mentioned Alex 98.5 The Sports Hub, Evan on CLNS. CLNS, of course, hosts his podcast. And so without further ado, Pat's Interference makes its return from an extended vacation that may or may not have been approved until I took it. But here we are doing our Patriots training camp preview. Evan Lazar and Alex Barth joining Pat's Interference for the first time, making their debuts. And when I invited you guys on, I got to tell you, the first thing that I thought of was my first year on the beat, where I would get into Gillette. People don't know the layout of the media room very early. And I was in a little cubicle, and all the way around, maybe like a 30-second walk where you guys in this more open space. And I would get in early because it's your first year, but I never had to start my morning with a Sports Center or First Take. And I was just so glad for both of you, because every morning in this open space, I could hear this show going on that I couldn't tell if it was a show or just two guys having conversations about MJ versus, LeBron and legacy stuff. So I'm very glad to bring on the Evan and Alex show, First Take, New England edition, now to Pat's Interference, because you guys have gotten much better since and have done an awesome job here on the beat. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. I think we learned a little something about volume control, making sure other people is what we've gotten better at. But yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, it's still the same, by the way. And our text messages back and forth are also just 24/7 sports debates also. So it's nothing has changed.
Yeah, you guys can keep your text, but we will take all of the good audio content here where I have control over the volume. But it was just funny because I remember even just being scared to go out in the corner. They recording isn't inviting. I don't want to be in that space. And lo and behold, there are like 4 other tables around you where people were working. But we haven't been there. It's honestly trying to go back to the memory bank, now in 2 years because of COVID. So it'll be fun to actually do that again since we'll be in the locker room. But no more media talk. We're here for the Patriots. As I said in the open, I sent you guys 10 topics. This is to preview, zoom out as far as possible about what we're all going to dive headlong into before we get ready for training camp. I'll run down these topics. Yes, we'll take about 3 to 4 minutes. No, we might just skip over it entirely. So leading off for our Patriots training camp preview, This is going to be a yes from Evan, I'm going to think. Starting with the Patriots, are they pivoting to a zone running game? Does that interest you, Evan? You're nodding already, so this is a yes.
Oh yeah, this is
okay.
Near the top of my list. I think it's a little bit of a, well, we cover the team and we need stuff to talk about bias, because this is just exciting for me to break down and discuss and hopefully see some tape of it in a couple months that we can actually really dissect and get into. But more so than that, I'm just excited to see them run something different potentially. We've seen the same thing for 2+ decades. It's been wildly successful, so I'm not complaining. But at the same time, it's nice to see them evolve a little bit and maybe change their stripes a little bit here. And I'm curious to see what a free form Bill Belichick looks like on the offensive side of the ball, just in terms of scheme. Is what Josh McDaniels was doing, especially in the latter part of his tenure here, what Bill actually wants to do or actually thinks is the most successful right now? Or does he have something completely different in mind? We talk so much about him evolving on defense, but I'm really interested to see how the scheme is going to evolve on offense moving forward.
Alex, was this a yes or no?
So there was one ahead on the list, right?
Well, yeah, we're going to jump around here. We're not going to go straight.
Oh, we're going to jump around. Okay.
Yeah.
I can, it's not just, I had this as a no.
Okay.
Just because it's interesting to me, but it's not so much the switch itself, it's the fallout of it. And that to me applied more to two of the other topics. So I'm not so much interested, like Evan said, seeing them do something different, whatever. NFL teams do things different, not the Patriots because they had a coach for 20 years, but it's more so the fallout of if they do something different, what happens. So I'm going to do the cop outs like I usually do and say, I'm going to dig a little deeper on this one and give it a no.
No, I like it. And I this would have been outside of my list, for podcast purposes. Personally, I'd be very interested because I think we're in the time and space where everything is theoretical, right? Like even in minicamp, there's no tackling, there's no pads. We need to see it fully formed there on the field. And it's just going to take a while because the interesting part to me, as much as we get into the zone running, is where basically if you're watching at home, you'll see all of the offensive linemen at the snap go laterally in one direction. And sometimes it'll be dramatically if it's outside zone, or it might be, less so if it's inside and then the running back is making a read. You'll just see everyone move at once as opposed to one guy pulling around, which Evan alluded to. It's been more of a man scheme where everyone's got a particular person they're blocking as opposed to an area. To me, are they going to have as much of a plan B, C, and D as we've heard about for so long, right? The game plan offense, which is why they had all of these different schemes, because they've run outside zone, pretty much as long as they've run this offense, but it's been, we're going to go hurry up on 3rd and 1 and try to convert. It'll be, a side dish as opposed to the main course. So if this becomes the main course and you're eliminating the side dishes for the purposes of we really want to get good at this main thing, and you burn it anyway in week 8 and you're just not running the ball, what's your plan B then?
Yeah, that's a great point. And you mentioned that they used it a lot on short yardage. That's pretty much all of the snaps that I could find of them running straight outside zone last season was 3rd and 1 behind Trent Brown. They want on the goal line. They want to just punch it in. They would run some form of outside zone lead, usually with Jakob or James Devlin back in the day leading from the fullback position. So it's not been something that they've done on, okay, it's 1st and 10 at the 25, we're starting the drive, let's run outside zone. It's really not one of those things. And I think one of the things that you hear about too from the Shanahan tree is this is not necessarily an easy system to just wake up one morning and say, we're going to just run this, right? It's really something that you have to drill time and time again. And it's a repetitive, rhythmic run process. And I think the one reason why I look at minicamp and say, okay, this could have some potential down the road is because they've spent so much time doing it. That's what you would see if you were out at minicamp with the Rams or out at minicamp with the 49ers or the Packers. Those teams would be running outside zone as much as the Patriots were because of that exact reason. You have to really have a great feel for it in order to run it at a high level.
Yeah. And it's a single scheme, but you're adapting it to every single front that you see, and the rules change. And you can go more quickly and it's simpler, but it doesn't mean it's any easier. And to your point, that was a note I had for minicamp. Every single team period when they're running the ball, they lead off with some outside zone, which, again, is a more basic scheme, but minicamp is heavy installation. So the more time they spend on something is really a hint of how much time they're going to spend on it in the regular season. All right, let's jump to defense. Which outside linebacker will start opposite Matt Judon? Alex, did this crack your top 5?
Yes, this is a big one for me because I think people underrated the impact Kyle Van Noy had last year. It was a little different role than he played the first time around. He wasn't as much as a pure pass rusher. He was setting the edge. He was getting involved in the passing game. He had, I think, 7 games in a row with at least one pass breakup, right? Knocking balls down the line of scrimmage. That was a huge help. And late in the season, when the defense kind of faded as a whole, I think part of the problem was teams were disregarding that edge when they were actually trying to rush, right? Teams were disregarding that edge, focusing everything to the weak side. It helped teams take away Matthew Judon and Christian Barmore. They need a strong presence, right? They're 2/3 of the way there on the defensive line. Judon can play, Barmore can play. Nobody doubts that. But if it's just those two guys, teams are going to continue to shift protection that way, and they're going to neutralize them. They need some sort of pop on that opposite side. It doesn't necessarily have to be a guy equal to Judon, but they need somebody that teams have to be aware of. And whether that's Josh Uche, whether it's Ronnie Perkins, whether they bring in a guy like Trey Flowers, whether it's some sort of rotation, I think, the defensive front, their success, are they going to be good or are they going to be great? A lot of it is predicated on the production they get out of that spot.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to find anyone better than Judon unless they swing a trade. So no worries about that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the way I think you were talking about the position highlights something you don't hear a whole lot around the league, where you need a second edge rusher. That's always implied in the conversation of you need a second pass rusher off of the edge. Here in New England, that means first and second down, can you set the edge? Because how many times have you heard Belichick talk about this? And the truth is, it's not an issue until it's an issue. And this was a real problem for them at Miami, against Buffalo, these games in December and January, where even Judon was having trouble. So Uche is the big name. Ronnie Perkins also potentially in the mix. Evan, did this make your top 5? And who do you like for that other spot?
Yeah, it made my top 5 as well, because I think as we got into last season a little bit with Judon, they tended to keep him away from the tight end to try to just let him pin his ears back and get after the quarterback and make plays behind the line of scrimmage. So what they really need is that sturdy first and down, second down edge setter that you were talking about, Andrew, because like you said, Bill Belichick says it all the time. The players say it all the time. That's the core of their run defense, is funneling everything back inside to the bigger defensive tackles and linebackers that they typically deploy. If they don't have that sturdy Kyle Van Noy, we can put him out over the tight end and have him hold up type of edge setter, then that's going to probably force Judon into that role, which means less sacks, less tackles for loss, and things of that nature. So it just lends itself so much better to having Judon be able to just be that rush linebacker on the backside making plays than if he has to do the lunch pail stuff. And I look at a guy like Ronnie Perkins and think maybe he has the best chance to be a true edge setter, because we've seen it out of Josh Uche. It's not there. I think that he's just somebody that is also better suited for a designated pass rusher type of role. And I don't really know how much they're going to actually get out of a guy like Anthony Jennings. So I look at Ronnie Perkins. He's a little bit sturdier. He played inline a lot with Oklahoma in college, so he's used to taking on blockers and kind of going toe to toe in the trenches. So I'd like to see him emerge as maybe not a full-time 3-down player, but at least the guy that they go to on 1st and 10.
See, that's some real CLNS pod synergy right there. Because my next question was, give me the 30-second scouting report you had on Ronnie Perkins a year ago coming out of Oklahoma, because this is a guy we haven't seen. He got the red shirt. You know, everyone expected to be his Oklahoma teammate. Ramondre Stevenson is the rookie 4th-round running back who we'll see you in a year when the Patriots draft you. Lo and behold, Stevenson plays a ton. And Ronnie Perkins was a healthy scratch virtually every single week. Let's stay on defense. This one would not have made my top 5. Again, I have the whole list here, but it's an interesting talking point because this player is already kind of enshrined in the Patriots Hall of Fame, and that there's a conductor's hat sitting somewhere enshrined in glass to commemorate the first hype train the Patriots coaching staff has ever constructed for a player who has never taken a snap. Does Cameron McGrone run with the starters early in camp? Did this make your top 5, Evan?
No, it did not, but I'm with you on this. I was absolutely shocked at how much praise they threw at Cameron McGrone. It was almost like they were forcing the storyline. And typically when you think about the Patriots, it's not just that it was out of character for them to hype up a player to begin with, but to hype up a second-year player. The rookies and the second-year guys are usually off limits. Like, we get to talk to the rookies twice a season or something like that, and unless it's a quarterback like Mac Jones. So to hear the coaches, and not just it was everybody. It was Matt Groh, the director of player personnel during the draft, basically saying that they looked at Cameron McGrone as their linebacker pick from this draft, which I don't really know if I love that logic, but fine. That's, what he had to say about it. And I'm not 100% sold that McGrone is ready based off of what we saw in minicamp. And I know it's just minicamp, but we'll see what happens this season in terms of training camp. But I look at McGrone as one of those players that might emerge, let's say around, we always hear from the players and from Belichick, Thanksgiving, real football starts after Thanksgiving. Maybe that's when he starts to take on a legitimate role with this defense. But Bentley's going to play a ton. I think Raekwon McMillan and Mac Wilson will fill in the rest of the holes from there. And maybe we see McGrone in the second half of the season.
And it's interesting you bring up the Thanksgiving part too, right, Alex? Because what was the first time we saw Cameron McGrone in a field? It was at practice in that kind of 3-week stretch. I don't remember the exact dates, late November, early December. And that's when he wowed Steve Belichick and Matt Groh and everyone else in the defensive staff, who now goes, yeah, we're really excited about him, even though he hasn't taken a snap. Now, minicamp was just 2 days, but it was telling that he consistently ran with the second teamers behind Bentley and Raekwon McMillan. Bentley's probably not going anywhere. Are you excited about McGrone enough to put him in your top 5, Alex?
No, I didn't have it because I think it's ultimately going to be a rotation. I think you have 3 younger, relatively inexperienced guys who have slightly different skill sets, like the same prototype of player, but some of them skew more one way than the other. I'm a big Raekwon McMillan guy. I was talking about hype train. I was calling him a starter last year in camp before he tore his ACL. I'm looking forward to him picking up right where he left off. But I think between him, McGrone, Wilson, I think you end up with some sort of rotation there. I don't know that we'll get a true starter. I don't know that any of those guys crack, a 50% usage rate.
All right, let's move on then. Jonnu Smith. I've said the same handful of things all offseason. It can't get any worse. I think he'll be better positioned as a guy who can kind of beat man coverage. The fullback supposedly is gone from this offense. That could open the door. I don't think he's built like a fullback. Alex, are you excited to see how high he can rebound and what that'll mean for the offense?
Yes, and this ties into something I said earlier, where it's not necessarily the switch to the zone run looks that I'm interested in, but the fallout. And I know you were talking about the run game before, but if you're going to do zone run, you have to have some passing concepts with zone. Otherwise, you're just, telegraphing your hand, right? And I think you look at some of the systems that do that, they're all tight end heavy systems, especially guys that catch the ball in space and succeed after the catch. And that's really where Jonnu Smith can shine. You go back, you mentioned the fullback, right? You go back to that Jakob Johnson interview, and look, I can't read German. I don't know exactly what he said. I'm going off the translation, but he didn't say they're not having a fullback. He said they're not having my position. And I wonder if that means the traditional blocking lead fullback, and if maybe, and I'm getting into semantics here, obviously, but maybe a more utility fullback they view as a different position, and a guy like a Kyle Juszczyk, right? That's a role I think Jonnu Smith could be really good in. How much of that will be in their offense? It would be a big shift, but supposedly there's going to be a big shift, so we'll see. But I actually think the ceiling for Jonnu Smith is really high this year, given a number of things that have happened this offseason.
Okay, well, Alex picks up German. Evan, are you excited about Jonnu Smith and potentially what that means for the offense?
I am, because I think that they're going to try to make this work with Jonnu Smith, because they have to. They are contractually tied to Jonnu Smith for at least another 2 years, I would say, based off the structure of his deal. So the only way that they can make that money, that cap hold of Jonnu Smith work, is to make schemes that are more adaptive to his style of play. Alex mentioned Kyle Juszczyk, and I think if you look at some of the moves that they made even prior to Jonnu Smith, whether it's Dalton Keene or the one day that we had Dan Vitale in, or whatever the case may be, they've been trying to get more athletic, I think, at that fullback position or H-back alignment role for a long time now, to try to get some pass catching pump out of that position. And you talk about the scheme change potentially, and you start to think about the slide route right behind the line of scrimmage, where he comes across and the bootleg, and he just is wide open in the flat, and Mac Jones just dumps it to him and lets him run it for 20 yards or whatever the case may be. The one skill that translated for Jonnu last season, it wasn't a great season for him, but he was still among the league leaders in yards after catch per reception, yards after catch over expected. So when he did get the football in his hands and some space to run with it, he still produced at the same rate after the catch that he did with the Titans. It just wasn't a volume thing that they were able to get his box score numbers up. So I still think that player is in there. He's an athlete. You just can't expect him to get open at the top of the route, make a move, get rid of a guy and catch a football. That's, if you want that tight end, and they already have that in Hunter Henry, but that's not Jonnu Smith. He's an athlete. Let him get into space, let him run with the football. And I think some of this outside zone stuff to create more horizontal stretch and create more bubbles in the defense for pockets to run into and things like that has Jonnu Smith in mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too, because people bring up the usage as I did to open this without Jonnu Smith. And you look at the film, they tried almost everything with him, different screens and different positions and his alignments and the different play action concepts. But I think his fit within the offense in a macro sense wasn't a great one, because they found out very quickly, we're not better running the ball at a 12 personnel with you and Hunter Henry on the field. And we're no more efficient passing with you, both of you on the field at the same time. So we had to pick one. They picked Hunter Henry. It was the right choice at the time. But if they are pivoting to what we've brought up now a few times, that more, I'm hesitant to say Shanahan style because that incorporates so much, but the stretch zone running game and then the boot stuff off of that, which you mentioned, the slide or submarine route, that was the same system he played in Tennessee, right? Like that in a macro sense might fit Jonnu Smith, understanding that's the offense where he scored a touchdown. That's the offense where you're going, crap, how did we lose him again in the red zone or on third down? So again, I don't think he's going to shift the kind of tectonic plate to this offense by himself as it goes, but he's a piece where you might have a breakout 3-4 week stretch where he's helping you win games. And it's because of his production in those areas and in those kind of ways. Here's a guy I think might be headed for a red shirt, and it's really not anyone that or any fault of his own. Tyquan Thornton. How excited are we? Are you tampering your expectations like I am? Where are we, Evan?
I'm tampering my expectations for him as well because of two things. One, his body, I just don't think is ready to have a high volume role in the NFL. I think he's going to have to pack on a little bit more weight. And I know everybody says, well, what about Devontae Smith? And what about Jameson Williams is a smaller, slender guy. But those two guys, and Devontae Smith in particular, won a Heisman Trophy at the college level. So I think comparing Tyquan Thornton to Devontae Smith is a little bit of a stretch. I just look at his body. I think he's going to have to pack on some weight. I also think his route detail from college, if they're going to stick to some of the same principles that they had in terms of the route tree, I'm not sure if he's ready to really run the complexities of the Patriots system just yet. And that's going to take some time, both mentally and physically, for him to get up to speed. The one thing I think that he can do is if they're going to run, as we keep alluding to, the zone game, he can stretch the field. And if you want to put him out there and have him threaten the deep third on the post route or the deep crosser and just pull coverage up the field with him, a lot of the time that was Nelson Aguilar last season. I think that they could get both those guys on the field together at some points and maybe be able to stretch the field a lot more than what they have in the last couple of years. But I see it as a very small usage rate in particular situations to when they want to open up things down the field for other guys.
Alex, I think he omitted what he really means, and it's the skinny wrists. The 2 percentile, right? Second percentile skinny. When did we start measuring wrists and why is what I want to know, because he got 2 questions, very unfortunately, asked about this at minicamp. His skinny wrists.
And I mean, you're talking a couple deep dive draft people here. Yeah. I never knew they measured wrists. I knew they did hand size.
I don't even think they measure wrists. I think people just looked at his wrists and thought that they were skinny. I don't think he actually has an official measurement on the wrist.
Someone did, though, and it might have been at like the East-West Shrine game or something where, like, I don't know, you have no more time than to just measure wrists or ankles or whatever else they were measuring down there, because it was on the list of like, this is the 2nd percentile, the skinniest wrist they've ever drafted. But I'm with you guys. That was the first time going on my 5th season of the beat, 7th or 8th in major football. And I'd never heard of this before at any level.
Yeah, that blew me away when he got that question at minicamp. I'm also tampering my expectations on this one. A lot of what Evan said, I just don't know physically that he's ready yet. I think they've got tremendous depth ahead of him. And I think they kind of told you in the draft what the plan was, right? They took, you could argue, the highest upside guy on the board at that time. There were other players on the board who were more NFL ready. I think you look at a guy like Sky Moore, he's going to come in and compete day one. Now, different kind of receiver. But again, if they wanted receiver production from that pick in 2022, you take Sky Moore, you take George Pickens, you take a guy like that. They took the guy with the biggest ceiling with I believe with the understanding that, he might not be ready right away. So I think he's a guy, maybe they get him involved a little bit on one hand, I want to say he's a guy they could do some interesting scheme touch stuff with, or design touch stuff with. But on the other hand, the design touch guys, they've struggled with that, from Nikhil to Jonnu Smith last year. That's never really been a big part of their offense. So I think we see more of him in 2023.
You know, I got to tell you, already this offseason, the Tyquan Thornton pick was a win, if only for the press conference that Matt Groh gave afterward. The defiant, bordering on almost indignant of, you know, if you want to get faster, you take the fastest guy. Our point being, well, can he see the field? And are you really going to put that all on the shoulders of a second-round rookie? But I love the Matt Groh press conferences because it broke from the Belichick mold of just the same category and group of cliches to being like, no, screw you. We know what we're doing. And look, I would trust, because everyone clamors, sticking on Tyquan Thornton for a second, about did they reach for him? You know, I think their intel as far as draft position goes the last few years, say what you will about the actual picks, has been spot on. Mac Jones fell to 15. They grabbed him there. Cole Strange, who knows? Tyquan Thornton, it came out almost immediately thereafter. 3 to 4 teams, including maybe the Steelers, who have an excellent track record, were about to pounce on him. So we'll see in the long term. I'm with you. I think they can also afford to give him maybe a yellow shirt, whatever is kind of in the middle there, instead of a red shirt, because Aguilar comes off the books next year. Jakobi Meyers on a restricted free agent tender. Bourne is in the final year of his deal in 2023, might be due for an extension. So he'll have opportunity next season. I think that's when they'll really need him. All right, we have 5 left. How many are still left on your respective list for your top 5s?
I think I got
3.
2, but
Okay.
I sometimes cheat and do 6 when you told me to do 5. So.
Alex?
I got 3.
Okay. All right. I think this is going to be on everyone's list. New offensive play caller. I don't have a whole lot to add. Or am I right or am I wrong?
You're right.
No, I
It's
didn't
not-
have this.
Oh, all right. Lead us off, because I was about to go down, you know, the dead end road of like, we're not going to see a whole lot more than we saw in minicamp. But Alex, take us down there yourself.
Well, I just think at this point, whether it's Matt Patricia or Joe Judge, they come from very similar backgrounds. Whatever the concepts look like, they're going to be relatively similar. Now, if you want to tell me Nick Caley or Troy Brown are still in the picture, then I probably put it back on my list. If you tell me, and they're not going to do this, but like, or let me say back in February when there was a chance of an outside hire, like at that point, it was way higher on my list. I think Patricia and Joe Judge are products of the same system. They're both in the Belichick coaching tree. They've both had similar career paths. I think at the end of the day, you're splitting hairs. Might one call things a little different than the other situationally? Probably, but I don't think there's much variance at this point between the 2 finalists. And I think that's what the Patriots want. I think they want a level of consistency at this point. So I can't get fired up about it, because I don't think the ultimate decision changes things one way or the other.
Evan?
Yeah, the reason why I have it on my list is because I don't like the reports that come out so far that Matt Patricia is the front runner to call plays, because he's coaching the offensive line. So you're telling me that during the week, he's going to work with the offensive line. Joe Judge is going to be over here with Mac Jones. He's going to be in the film room with Mac Jones. Then we're going to get to Sunday and Matt Patricia is going to be in Mac Jones's ear. Like, that just doesn't add up to me from a just communication perspective, right? It just feels like there could be breakdowns, like a game of telephone, where during the week, Joe Judge is telling them one thing and they're discussing a coverage or a front or something specific about the opponent. And then they get to the game and Matt Patricia's on a completely different page. We've heard rumblings at times about this going on defense, where Gerard Mayo might be leading meetings or talking to the front 7 guys, and then they get to Sundays and Steve Belichick is the one calling plays. I'm worried that same dynamic could happen on offense, where there's really no one's wearing the hat, right? Somebody's got to, at the end of the day, take charge of both sides of the football and be the one that the buck stops with me, and I'm the one kind of setting the terms of engagement here. With the offensive thing, the offensive play caller to me should be the one that's closest with the quarterback, because that's the most important thing. At the end of the day, you call a play in the huddle, the receivers run the routes, the blockers block the scheme. Their job is pretty cut and dry. It's the quarterback that needs to feel good about what they're calling and what they're running. And we hear it all the time. You know, what do you like here? What do you like there? What are the 3 plays that you really love here? Those are the things that in the conversations that you have to have with an offensive play caller. And if Matt Patricia is going to be with the big guys in the O-line room and they're going to be breaking down, Mike points and fronts and things like that, and Joe Judge is going to be the one breaking down coverages with Mac Jones, then you better stick with the guy that's with Mac Jones 6 days a week and not all of a sudden pivot at the last second.
Yeah, that's well said on all accounts. And I would even bring up day 7, right? Matt Patricia is going to be in charge of the largest position group on the team. If you were looking at the number of assistant coaches in the sideline, which of course, us being maniacs, we have time to do this. The number one coach who was on his knee most recently was Dante Scarnecchia with the offensive line, talking with his group, engaged with them the whole time, because they have a lot to go over. Everything in the run game, everything in the pass game, the different looks you're getting on third down and coordinating all of that. God forbid there's an injury. Do we need to shuffle around? So that person coordinating the offensive line, of course, we've had a couple coaches since Dante Scarnecchia, doesn't have a whole lot of time to confer with the quarterback and go over the play sheet and say, this is what we want to do next drive. He's going to have his hands full, more full than anyone else on that staff as far as position coaches go. So I think, and this was the point raised by Mike Lombardi, I think a few weeks ago, he's leaning towards Joe Judge, despite the reports that trickle out. I truly don't think they've made up their minds, but I think logistically Judge is the clear choice, and we'll see how that goes. All right. This one I think might have us divided. Isaiah Wynn and Trent Brown flip-flopping. That make your top 5?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alex.
I just think anytime you have, and it's more about Isaiah Wynn, I think anytime you have a guy playing a position he's never played before at the pro level, and Wynn did it in the preseason his rookie year, but he really doesn't have experience there. Anytime you have a guy playing out of position, especially a role as crucial as tackle, it bears watching. In training camp, I mean, that's a textbook training camp storyline, right? Does this, and into the preseason, does this guy look like he fits in this new spot that he's never played before? I think that's massively consequential. And then to the bigger picture, they realistically could have 4 of their 5 offensive linemen be new. When I say new starters, obviously Trent Brown, Michael Onwenu, and Isaiah Wynn are back, but they're all going to be in different spots. We remember last year, early in the season, the offensive line struggled. I think a big part of that was a lot of new pieces and issues with communication. You really don't want to see that in year 2, but if you're going to move all these pieces around, that might come up. So I think this is a twofold one. Is Isaiah Wynn a right tackle? Can he hold his own there? And then the offensive line as a whole, and then Mac Jones as well. What does the communication look like? How are they keeping Mac Jones protected? All of that, because that was something they really struggled with at times last year.
Yeah, so this would have been my 6th one if I could have an extra and if I could have a bonus. But I think the biggest thing that I look at with Isaiah Wynn is his future with the team, because the Patriots are so big on continuity with offensive linemen. And when they put Trent Brown at left tackle and they move Isaiah Wynn to right tackle, that tells me that they're planning on having Trent Brown be the left tackle for the 2022 season. So if Isaiah Wynn comes into camp and he doesn't play well, or he's out of shape, or he gets off to a bad start like he did last year, is he expendable? Is he a potential trade chip here? Is he somebody that they might move on to from a year early instead of a year too late? I've been in the school of thought, too many changing parts already. Let's not also ship out Isaiah Wynn and create another hole like they did with Shaq Mason on the offensive line. But I could definitely see them looking at Isaiah Wynn, with that cap hit and saying, he's not worth it. He's not performing up to this level of compensation, and we can get the same 80%, let's say, on the dollar with Justin Herron as we can with Isaiah Wynn. So I'm interested to see what happens and if Isaiah Wynn makes it through camp as a New England Patriot. I think it's a little similar to his former Georgia teammate with Sony Michel. Eventually, they decided that they had better options or comparable options behind Damien Harris, and they went in a different direction.
Yeah, I'm bullish on Isaiah Wynn's odds of staying here for a few reasons, but I want to back up for a second because the Wynn conversation does have a lot of different tentacles, right? Like I talked to someone this offseason who told me the Patriots were kicking around moving him on the offensive line for months before minicamp. And I don't know whether that speaks more to his fit in New England or his fit within the larger puzzle of the offensive line, and they're just trying to find the best combination. But clearly, in either instance, he didn't perform well enough at left tackle for them to start the conversation going, Isaiah Wynn at left tackle, and that'll stay. That's it. Because now they're looking at him at right tackle. If he can't play right tackle, what is their plan B? Because I like Justin Herron. I also love his fit as a swing tackle, someone who can play both positions, and they might be able to get 75 to 80%. The problem with that is Trent Brown is always missing games. And with Isaiah Wynn, if he can play right tackle, or at least do it, so, you can put him back on the left side inevitably when Trent Brown is out for a week or 2 or 4 or 6. So that kind of depth where, you don't have an extra body in there, but guys with positional flexibility, we've talked about this pretty much every day on the beat, is really valuable. And that's why I think the salary isn't great, and they could certainly get a good haul for him if someone comes to them with a high pick. I just don't know if that's going to happen given he's switching to a new position. But I mean, desperation will motivate anyone as strongly, as quickly as anything in the NFL. And an injury to, a Pro Bowl left tackle and some kind of contender, especially in the AFC, that might be enough for them to say, yeah, we'll take your second round pick.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you're good. All right. We got 2 big ones left. And then I have one that I like to call Barth bait. So let's get to the bait first. Punting competition. Jake Bailey, baby. Did he make it on your list?
No. I know I'm supposed to take this one. I know I'm supposed to. And I saw that there. I'm like, that's for me. He looked really good in the spring. And Julian looks fine. And I think he might have an NFL career. But Jake Bailey's still a top 3 punter in football when he's healthy. I'll watch for the contract extension. I'm surprised that hasn't happened yet with his $4+ million cap hit, the second highest for a punter in the league. But I don't think it's a competition this year. This isn't Jake Bailey versus Ryan Allen. I think he's ingrained as the starter.
Yeah, and that ended pretty quickly as it was. Obviously, reverse roles with Jake Bailey coming on as a rookie. Jake Bailey's interesting because he was one of the first contracts brought up, and we're all doing the how can they create cap space pieces, and they just haven't done it. And to me, it's almost an indication of like their actions or inactions will tell you what they believe, right? Like, hey, Ronnie Perkins might be a starter. They seem okay with that. Jake Bailey's still on the books for $4+ million. They seem okay with that, and that they're betting that these players will kind of come through. We'll just wrap it up here. Alex, I think I passed you during one mini camp practice. You were timing the hang time. Did you say 6 seconds on one of his? No.
I think his best was like 5.6, 5.7.
Okay. It's still.
Oh, so around 6. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He was booming them. I am not in the stopwatch club, but I appreciate that kind of work in detail. And that still 5.6, 5.7 is freaking ridiculous. All right. The 2 big ones left. Let's go with the corners. Look, this is going to be a competition, I think, all the way to the end. We know about Jack Jones. I'll say Jack Jones, even as a 4th-round pick, someone who I thought they reached for. He's got some man-to-man skills. This is a position we've seen this time and again. Doesn't require a ton of experience to play in New England or a ton of reps to build up your football IQ in kind of a man system. Not knocking Jack Jones' football IQ. I think this was even in the kind of scouting breakdown that Daniel Jeremiah released that Bill Belichick wrote in the early 90s with Cleveland. Just this is a position where that's not necessary. Here's a guy, cover him, largely end of story. Beyond Jack Jones, Jalen Mills seems like a safe bet. What's the most interesting thing to you, Evan, about this kind of quarterback competition and how it could unfold?
Yeah, this is probably the number one question I have on my list in terms of, do they have enough just high-end talent there to survive in what is an AFC and a schedule that is absolutely loaded with great wide receivers? And you look across just the division, Tyreek Hill now and Jalen Waddle in Miami, Diggs and Davis in Buffalo. I even like the Jets receiving corps. Like, I like what they've done in New York. I'm not the biggest Garrett Wilson fan, but I think he can play, and you put him with Corey Davis and Elijah Moore, who I'm a huge fan of. That's a tough group to go up against. And I know you look at it and say, well, maybe Zach Wilson makes it a little bit easier if he doesn't really emerge as a second-year player, but they also have Devontae Adams on the schedule. They have Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow on the schedule late in the year against the Bengals, and they don't have a number 1 corner. So I look at this secondary a lot like those teams from 2010 to 2012, where they really had to get by with soft zone and smoke and mirrors and mix and matching in the back end. And it wasn't until they traded for Aqib Talib and then eventually signed Darrelle Revis that secondary took a turn for the better. And then they kept passing the torch, right? Revis to Malcolm Butler to Gilmore. And there was always a succession plan. Right now, there really isn't a succession plan unless you hope that Jack Jones is going to emerge and become an absolute stud, which maybe he does. But I don't know if they have the high-end talent to go toe-to-toe with the other teams in the AFC with the wide receiving talent that they have on their schedule and just around the conference in general. And I worry about this group a lot for the Patriots going forward. But maybe the way to get by is we saw last year with a little bit more zone coverage. And during that winning streak, that was a big part of their turnaround, was playing some more zone, but then they go into the draft and they draft 2 man coverage corners. So what do I know, I guess?
Alex, what does he know?
I don't know. This is a tough one to figure out. This is a really tough one to figure out, even for Evan, who I'm surprised is as high on Jack Jones as he is, given his hatred of Pac-12 or the former Pac-12. I think in the slot, they're actually in really good shape. And you have this conversation, and I feel like a lot of the times, whether it's on CLNS, whether it's on the Sports Hub, whether I'm writing about it, you say, well, they don't have enough at corner, and people say, well, what about Jonathan Jones? You're not including Jonathan Jones. I think it's important to understand that it really is 2 positions at this point, the way the game has evolved.
It is. But can you throw up a stop sign to those callers, as I'm sure you do? Jonathan Jones is a very good, serviceable player. And I'm not saying that in ratings are everything, but what do we think Jonathan Jones is rated over at Matt? Like an 80 tops, like that guy is not making or breaking games in reality or virtual.
Right.
So good player, but you can't pin your hopes on Jonathan Jones as much as he's seen Tyreek Hill over the years to win both those Dolphin games. So anyway, sorry, go on.
The other thing, and it's a good point. And the other thing is, I think I put him in the low to mid 80s because I think in the slot, he's actually a very good corner. If you move him to the outside, you create 2 problems. You lose a good slot corner, and you're probably not maximizing the player's skill set now on the outside in Jonathan Jones. So you do Jonathan Jones. I love the Marcus Jones pick. I still think Miles Bryant give them something. They're fine in the slot. It's on the outside that scares me. And the biggest issue is traditionally, and maybe they'll break from this year, they love to rotate at corner. Part of the reason they were so good there in the 18, 19, even into the 2020 window, right, is they had 3 guys that could play that position, and they'd rotate them. So, the receivers may be at, 45, 50 snaps. The guy he's lining up across from is maybe at 35, 40 because they had 3 guys who could do that. You think about Stephon Gilmore, Malcolm Butler, J.C. Jackson a few years ago, and then more recently was Jackson and Gilmore and Jason McCourty, right, could come and be a serviceable third. I don't know that they have 2 guys right now. Like Malcolm Butler, to me, last time he played a full season was good, but that was 2 years ago. That was a retirement ago. There were only 8 corners in the league last year over the age of 30 that played 10 or more games. Malcolm Butler's 32. The numbers are against him having that kind of sustained performance. Jack Jones is a rookie. We don't know. He might be that guy, but it is way too early to say that. Terrence Mitchell is, he's kind of surged the last couple of years, but is he at that level yet? He probably needs to take another step. So you look at a team that likes to have 3 guys, the math just doesn't add up there. Somebody's really going to have to, I think, not just naturally progress their game, but play above expectations for them to get to the baseline. And then even then, you look at another step for them to operate the way they traditionally want to operate at that position.
Yeah. All right. Let's get a little optimistic here for a second. Not because we need to do the both sides argument, but I think my standpoint would be when something's like this, clearly dire, clearly a problem, and we talk to the Patriots assistants once every 2 weeks, how would they soften or mollify what we see as what the hell is going on here at corner? And I think their first answer would be, I think this is true, pass coverage is a part of pass defense. The other half of pass defense, of course, is the pass rush. And when you look at, this is me now editorializing and speaking, there are plenty of excellent defenses in recent modern NFL history that are zone heavy, they're zone based, that didn't have great corners. You go out on the West Coast, any of these cover 3 systems, even some cover 2s had a little bit of a revival, the Fangio stuff. The problem is there's not a real defined great pass rush beyond Judon and Barmore. And maybe Josh Uche steps up to soften some of the blow at corner. So I think there are solutions here. You're just kind of counting on everything going right at once from a third pass rusher to step up. They're going to pivot and place them more too high. And the zone is going to work out and you'll mix it enough. So, because clearly they're comfortable with what they have. I don't think they love it, of course, but they might have also just seen the corner market kind of price them out, even though it kind of came down at this point. The other problem, now going back to reality, is that a lot of the receivers we mentioned, and we excluded Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen out in Minnesota, starting on Thanksgiving, are in the back half of the schedule. It's Buffalo twice. You get the Bengals coming to Gillette in December. It's at that point, if they can stay healthy, I think they've got a shot. But you talked about Terrence Mitchell at the end. That's a guy who was just released from a zone system and was so and man, according to various PFF grades back in Cleveland. So it's a question mark, but I think that'll be the fun of camp, right? We'll have this back and forth competition between all these guys to the end. One position, there is no competition, no doubt about it. This guy has received more positive hype and news and reports and rumblings and whispers and nuggets and all of that. Mac Jones. I don't want to talk about Mac in the macro sense. I want to talk about him in the micro sense, and specifically his deep ball. We all wrote about this. This is something I jumped on in January, just to saying, look, if he's going to make a jump in any particular area, it's the deep ball. Because according to Sports Info Solutions, he was the 4th least accurate passer on throws 15 yards or downfield. Within 15 yards, he's top 5. So where does that leave us heading into training camp, Evan?
It's interesting because I'm actually not as caught up with Mac's deep ball per se. I think that this is a little bit semantics. I'll give you that, but I'm more looking at his drive throws, which are throws in that deep middle of the field. Can he access the deep middle of the field with more regularity? Can he make the far hash throw to the sideline with a little bit more tail on it? The actual deep balls that he's thrown when he's uncorked it and have the opportunity to put some touch under the ball and float it down the field have looked pretty good throughout his entire career for the most part. But those drive throws and, fitting a ball in between 2 defenders into the middle of the field, or, getting that seam ball over the top of a linebacker and inside the safety to Hunter Henry, getting a ball all the way out to the sideline on a deep hitch or a comeback or something like that. Those are the throws that I'm looking at more, just because I think that those are ultimately the throws he's going to make with more regularity anyways. And I specifically look at the deep middle stuff and think a lot of the time last year, from what we had seen, when they were hunting explosive plays, it was either underneath stuff that turned into ridiculous yards after catch by like Kendrick Bourne, against the Titans. He runs away from the whole defense somehow and he's loose, or it was fade balls down the sideline that somebody went on and made a play on the football, because they weren't really able to access that 10 to 20 yard range inside the numbers. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Mac didn't necessarily have enough zip or velocity on the football to get the ball into tight coverage in that area of the field. So when I think about Mac making that next step as a thrower, it's not so much about the deep bombs 40, 50 yards down the field. It's more about him being able to zip the football into tight coverage in, let's say, the first 20 yards in the field, because those plays often become, okay, you catch the ball 15 yards down the field on the move and you're running. Now, all of a sudden, the 15-yard gain is a 30-yard gain because they're able to catch up after the catch. So that's, I think, a big part of it for me is being able to drive the football down the field with more velocity.
I think it's an important distinction. And I think those throws also speak to key situations, right? Like, when are you throwing that, 12-yard dig, 15-yard dig? 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, they got to have it downs. Or sometimes when you're in the high red zone, where we know how much they struggled when they weren't pounding the ball straight ahead in the low red zone. Are you the same school of thought there, Alex? Are you looking more deep? Like the stuff at Alabama, and people reference this because, again, writing about it in January, I get a lot of pushback. Oh, he was the best deep ball passer at Alabama. You know what he had at Alabama? A better receiving core than arguably he had last year, and where they're able to stop because it's underthrown a little bit, get under it, and still make the catch anyway. So, the touch is certainly there, short, medium, and deep. But the drive throws, you're looking the entirety of his deep throws. What are you looking at, Alex?
I'm looking at the mental side of it, honestly. And I was actually going to bring up the Alabama thing and how well he threw the deep ball there. And obviously it's a different circumstance, but this is something I've talked a lot about with Evan on our podcast. Something Alabama did a ton, and I think Mac was really good with, not throwing deep outside the numbers, but having that speed slot, right? And using the slot to stretch the field vertically. And that's, Jakobi Meyers is good at a lot of things. He's not that guy. He's not a guy that's going to stretch the field from that slot. But they now have the freedom with Devontae Parker here to move Nelson Aguilar in the slot. He can add that element. If Trey Nixon makes the team, he's a guy that can add that element. So that's one thing I'm looking at. Do they give him more opportunities to throw the ball deep within his comfort zone, the kind of deep throws that he's more used to making? The other thing I'm looking at, and this is the mental side of it, this was more problem early in the year, but it kind of popped up throughout the years. It does for a lot of rookie quarterbacks. This isn't a Mac specific thing where, we'd put on the all 22 on Monday, and maybe even he completes the throw 7 or 8 yards downfield, but there's a guy 15 or 16 yards downfield that he's right there, right? And why didn't he make the throw? Did he not see it? Did he not trust himself? Whatever it is. I want to see him transition to making that throw more. And it looks like he's put in the work, right? We've seen the clips of him throwing deep. There's the picture going around, jacked Mac, where, he's bigger now. It looks like he's put some more zip on the ball, all of that. Is he using that? Is he testing the deep middle more? Is he testing tight windows more, right? Does he trust his arm more? I'm not saying he wasn't confident last year, but any rookie, you see this with most rookie quarterbacks, they will be a little timid out of the gate. Can Mac shake that off and now say, I'm Mac effing Jones. I'm an NFL quarterback. I'm the quarterback of the Patriots. I took them playoffs last year. I'm going to come out here and, to quote Drew Bledsoe, just effing sling it, right? I'm not saying he has to become a total gunslinger. I don't need to see him become Patrick Mahomes, but I think at times he trended towards safer options last year. I want to see him, especially in camp when, you're not necessarily risking anything. I want to see if he's willing to kind of test some of those more tougher throws and see how much he can really get away with.
I think
it'll be more than it was last year.
On the Sports Hub, the next time you come on the air, I'm Alex Effin Barth, and I am here to sling it. I just want the hot takes flying for the next 15 minutes. Don't let anyone speak. You want to roll like that and just have it go and go and go. If there's a caller, they need to speak at the same time as you do, because you are here to effing sling it. That was great. Yeah, and I think the Mac conversation is interesting, and I think at this point, like I said earlier, it's all theoretical, right? Like, he has had a very NBA player offseason. You got the pictures that are coming out, best shape of his life. Things are so different. He's about to make the leap. And, that's a lot easier to see in a much more individualized sport like basketball in the NBA. But it will be really telling, because everything we've heard coming out of Foxborough and people that I've talked to has been very positive. This is his team now. He knows that. And I mentioned this on this pod multiple times. He was almost happy to step into this role as soon as that wild card game ended. Like, at the podium, it was very strange for someone who had just gotten his brains beaten over 4 quarters. And look, he was one of the better players in that game, but they had lost decidedly, and he was ready to move on as we are now. So I told you guys this off air, but any other storylines we missed? Evan doesn't get to answer. He had 6 in his top 6. That was his bonus. Did you have anything that I missed, Alex?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily an on-field thing. It's more of a roster construction thing. I'm interested to see what happens with Damien Harris and Jakobi Meyers. Sony Michel in the contract year last year, young guy steps up. They felt comfortable moving on from him. It's a little different conversation for both. Harris, it's kind of the same as Sony. Does Kevin Harris, Pierre Strong step up? I'm not a big pay running backs guy. I think Harris is the kind of guy you keep around for the presence. He's clearly 100% bought in. He has the relationship with Mac, but his situation bears watching. It could be an extension too. It could go the other way where they pay him. Myers a little more interesting. They're very deep at wide receiver. There are going to be some guys that push in the slot. I mentioned Trey Nixon, right? If they're going to move Nelson Aguilar into the slot, what's his deal? He signed that tender very late. So I'm not saying either one's necessarily going to move. I'm not saying either one's going to get an extension in camp, but it is something that kind of, after the way the Sony situation went last year, I think you keep on the back burner and you kind of keep a peripheral view on.
Any of that jive with you, Evan?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see what happens at wide receiver, and maybe with Jakobi Meyers in particular, because he has another year like he did last year. I'm also interested to see how the rest of the NFL really views him and values him as a player, because I think sometimes, and we maybe saw this a little bit with JC as well, we were all kind of expecting JC to get that like Jalen Ramsey type contract, right? 20 plus million a year. And that didn't really come to fruition in his free agent market. And I think a big part of that might've been his undrafted status. And I know that that's kind of silly because it's what you did in the league, but at the end of the day, you were undrafted for a reason. I think a guy like Jakobi Meyers doesn't have that top end speed like we were just discussing. And I'm interested to see, even if he does have another high volume year, does the rest of the league really look at Jakobi Meyers as a true 1,000-yard receiver? Or do they think that New England just really didn't have, he's the best of the lot in New England and he's playing the slot role that lends itself to a lot of targets, and that's why he saw that type of volume and that type of production? If that's how the rest of the league looks at it, then I don't think that he's going to go anywhere, because I don't think the trade is going to be out there for them to make. That's going to make it worth it. But if Trey Nixon emerges, if Tyquan Thornton emerges, it does seem like somebody's going to have to be the odd man out eventually at wide receiver, whether it's Myers, it's Aguilar. I think those two are probably the front runners for it to be them. And I think Devontae Parker is going to play a lot. So eventually somebody's going to have to be the odd man out. You can carry 6, but then you're talking about odd man out in terms of playing time, right? And who's going to be the guy that's off the field? It's a deep group. It's not necessarily an alpha group. There's not really that one top dog, but it is 1 through 6, a pretty deep group that has a lot of competition there.
Yeah, the contract stuff is interesting too, because Jakobi Meyers has been very open about the fact he wants an extension. He wants to stay. And it sounds like a guy who, even entering his prime, would be willing to take a discount. And he's hired the agent you would hire if you were anyone who wants to go to the Patriots in any sort of position. You could work concessions. Hire Drew Rosenhaus, okay? Like he will be the guy to get the deal done with Bill Belichick. And that's a small group, just as someone who's going to be able to go and have those conversations. To date, they haven't. But the window where we've seen extensions in the past, Jonathan Jones, Shaq Mason, is really late August, right before the season starts. Are you going to stick around? Here's the terms that they reach it. I think if he stays healthy, there's a good chance of that getting done. And then, as far as an odd man out, I think Aguilar, contractually at least, is probably going to be headed that way. But it will be an interesting market. The only other roster construction note I had, and I kept this off the list, I would not be surprised if we see Jamie Collins or Dante Hightower come aboard a week or two into camp, or a couple of days beforehand. Again, it's a linebacker group that, like receiver, don't define alpha. Not that they would step in as said alpha, but you get another rotational body in there, particularly you have an injury. Those guys, hit as much as anyone in camp. And obviously they don't need any time, catching up on the system, so to speak. So that's about it. Your training camp preview. Guys, what do you have coming up? Obviously people can listen and watch you at the Patriots Beat podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. You can watch us on Patriots Beat or listen to us. You can look it up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we're also going to be doing training camp previews, I'm sure, of some sort over the next couple of weeks. So, Patriots Press Pass, Patriots Beat, and we'll have to have you on, Andrew, do a little home and home here on the CLNS podcast network, and it'll be a good time. But Patriots Beat Tuesday, Thursday, preview. That's what we're all doing right now. Yeah.
Would love that. Alex, are you on the Sports Hub anytime soon, or where can we find your stuff?
Yep. I don't know if this is dropping today. I'm on tonight, Friday. Maybe it's already passed. I'll also start my training camp preview series on 985thesportshub.com next week. So that's going to be some written stuff. We're going to start off with the 3 biggest questions facing the offense in camp. We'll also do the defense. We'll look at the position battles, and there'll be podcasts as well with myself, Matt Judon, getting you ready for what's going to be a fun camp. I think last year was fun in a different way with like the whole Mac and Cam thing, which in itself was interesting to cover, but felt like other things kind of got pushed to the side. I think this year's going to be fun because it's really the whole roster we get to talk about and kind of break down. So
that's a great point. Can you do me a favor and ask Matt if he's going to bring back the Felger and Maz, homage, or maybe he's mocking them a little bit on Mondays. I don't want to be like the 100th person to ask him. So can you do that on my behalf?
Yeah, I think he has a standing order for that, but I'll bring it up. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I will take them at any time about any sort of topic. It just could be training camp practice and they're running for half the time, and just how much so-and-so's running sucks in the form, and he's going back and forth with the voices. If you haven't seen Matt Doloff impersonate Felger and Maz and go back and forth, please find those on Twitter, as you can find these guys on Twitter as well. All right, we'll have you back. Thanks, guys.